Before we begin, how are you feeling today? I hope you're okay and taking care of yourself. If today was a bad day, I'm glad you're here. Take a deep breath. This moment is yours. Ready? Let's begin. We don't usually see the moment the mistake is made. It doesn't come with a warning or a sudden drop in temperature or a sign that says, if you do this, something will be lost. Most of the time, it feels small, harmless. You stay 5 minutes longer. You take the unfamiliar road. You trust a stranger because they smile just right. You say yes when your gut whispers no. These are the choices that rewrite everything. And when the consequences finally arrive, they don't always come loudly. Sometimes they slip in through the seams, quiet as breath, cold as memory, final as silence. The stories you're about to hear are not about evil. They're about ordinary people who made a single wrong decision. They didn't summon spirits or open portals or beg for darkness. They just hesitated. They followed curiosity, comfort, pride, fear, or love, whatever it was that tugged at them in that moment. And what they found on the other side was something they couldn't undo. Some of them were just passing through a place. Others were looking for answers. A few thought they were helping someone, but they all crossed the line. And once you cross it, you don't always get to come back. These are stories about the kind of horror that doesn't need monsters. The kind that waits in empty hallways, old lakes, dusty rooms, and sealed-off doors. They ask one question, again and again. What if you had done one thing differently? What if you had just walked away? As you listen, remember this. Your next decision might feel small, but something could be waiting on the other side of it. Watching, listening, ready. So choose carefully. And now, we begin. The first story is a reminder that the wilderness is not always where you get lost. It's where something can find you. When a group of friends ignored the safety of a marked trail, they discovered that the cost of a single detour could be measured not in miles, but in silence. This is the story of what they left behind in Zion. Story 1. We should have stayed on the trail. It started with a trail marker we chose to ignore. The main path curved gently through the red rocks of Zion, steady and safe. But when Casey pointed toward a narrow side trail that veered left, overgrown and partially hidden, I saw something flicker in everyone's eyes. That look of craving something off the map, something no one else had seen. It reconnects, he said, flashing a grin that made it sound like he knew what he was doing. I wanted to speak up. I really did, but the others were already moving, and I didn't want to be the cautious one. Not again. The air was dry, sharp with heat. We'd been hiking since early morning, and our water bottles were already half empty. It was my first time in Zion, but Casey had come here every summer since high school. He was the type that always seemed to know more than he let on, the kind of person who turned recklessness into charisma. Still, something in his voice when he said it reconnects felt too confident, like he was selling something he hadn't tried himself. We ducked under twisted branches and stepped into the shade of narrow canyon walls. The trail became steep fast, a mix of loose gravel and exposed roots. It didn't feel like a trail anymore. I kept glancing back at Tucker, our geology major, always carrying that oversized camera. He looked unsure, which scared me more than if he had panicked. Jenna, new to the group and dating Casey, was already struggling with the climb, but kept quiet, her breath shallow and sharp. We kept going. I can't tell you exactly when we got lost. That's the thing with slow descents. You never realize you're in trouble until the horizon disappears. The markers were gone, and so was any cell signal. The sun was tilting west, painting long shadows across the canyon floor, and the heat had given way to that eerie kind of silence that only comes before dark. Casey insisted we were fine. If we head toward the rock spine and keep west, we'll hit the main trail again. No map, no GPS, just west, just hope. An hour later, Jenna tripped, opening a gash on her shin. Tucker used his bandana to wrap it, but she was limping now. I offered to turn back with her. Casey snapped. Turning back is how you get stuck. And maybe he was right, or maybe he just didn't want to admit he was wrong. Either way, we kept going. I think it was around 7 p.m. when the light began to slip and we hit a dead end. A sheer rock wall blocked our path, and behind us, the canyon narrowed so much that shadows pressed in on both sides. There was no signal, no sound, and for the first time, even Casey went quiet. We had to spend the night. No one said the word lost, but we all felt it. We found a narrow shelf to sit on, passed around the last of the granola bars, and tried to keep warm in our sweat-soaked clothes. That night, the desert was colder than I ever imagined. Tucker whispered about the temperatures in canyons dipping below freezing, and Jenna's teeth were chattering uncontrollably. I wrapped my jacket around her and held her hand. Casey stood apart from us, pacing, staring into the dark like he was waiting for something to emerge. That's when we first heard it. A scraping sound, not from the wind or rocks. Slow, deliberate, like someone or something moving across the sandstone behind us. We froze. Casey clicked on his flashlight, but the beam dissolved into the black. No one moved, not until Jenna started to cry softly, her breath hitching in her throat. "It's probably nothing," I whispered, but it didn't feel like nothing. And whatever it was still there. Watching. At dawn, Jenna was missing. Her pack, her jacket, gone. Just an imprint in the dust where she'd been lying. We screamed her name until our throats cracked, until Tucker was hoarse and I was sobbing. Casey shouted loudest, but his face looked different. Less panic, more denial. We searched the rocks, the ridges, climbed every ledge we could reach, but there was no blood, no sign of struggle. Just nothing. Just the wind. It was Tucker who found the tracks, barefoot, leading away from camp. Not Jenna's shoes, not any of ours. We followed them. What else could we do? They led us to a narrow crevice in the rock. Too narrow for a person to have passed, unless they had no choice, or weren't entirely real. Casey wanted to keep going. I refused. I grabbed his shoulder and told him if we didn't turn back now, we'd all be next. He looked at me like I'd betrayed him. Maybe I had. But I knew the truth by then. We weren't just lost in the canyon. We'd brought something with us when we stepped off that trail. We found help the next evening, after Tucker climbed a ridge high enough to catch a signal. Park rangers came by chopper. They asked us the usual questions. Where did you last see her? What direction did you go? Why did you leave the marked path? We didn't have answers, only fear, guilt, and Casey shaking hands. He never said a word during the debrief, just stared at the rocks like they owed him something. They never found her. 3 months later, Jenna's mother called me. I didn't know how she got my number. She just wanted to know if her daughter was afraid before she disappeared. I told her no. I lied. The truth is, Jenna had that look in her eyes hours before she vanished. Like she already knew she wouldn't make it out. Like some part of her spirit had gone quiet. Waiting. I replay that moment every night. The moment we reached the fork, where the trail curved right and Casey pointed left. We laughed. We followed. And that was the moment it all began to fall apart. So if you're ever hiking Zion, or anywhere unfamiliar, and someone says, "Let's go off trail," remember this. Trails exist for a reason. They're not just for safety. They're boundaries. Lines drawn between what we think we know and what waits on the other side. Sometimes one bad decision isn't just a mistake, it's an invitation. And the canyon, it never gives back what it accepts. If you're still with me, still listening, thank you. And please, don't be afraid to be the one who says no. It might be the only thing that keeps your name from being whispered in someone else's story like this. If these stories stay with you, if they feel a little too close, you're exactly where you need to be. Stay with us. There's more beyond the veil. Some dangers wait in the wild, in the open, beneath the stars. Others hide in plain sight, behind locked doors, inside buildings we trust. Our next story takes us to a historic hotel in Minnesota, where a quiet room on the third floor held more than memories. Sometimes, a bed made too neatly is the first sign you're not alone. This is what happened in room 304. Story 2. There's a bed made in room 304. I checked into the Palmer House Hotel on a Tuesday evening, chasing sleep after a long stretch of highway between Duluth and the Twin Cities. I'd never stayed in Sauk Center before, but I liked old buildings, and the Palmer had charm, the kind of creaky, crooked floor charm that whispered its history through every doorknob and hallway. I didn't ask for anything special. I didn't even plan to stay. It was just one night, a pit stop. But when the desk clerk handed me a brass key and said, "You'll be in 304, something in her voice hesitated, just for a second, like she had more to say but decided not to. I was too tired to notice. The elevator was older than my car. It rattled and moaned as it rose. On the third floor, the hallway stretched long and narrow, its carpet faded and soft like well-worn memory. I passed a cleaning cart parked beside a cracked open door. From inside came the sound of a vacuum shutting off and a voice humming a lullaby I couldn't quite place. Room 304 was near the end of the corridor. The door opened with a weighty click, and inside was a quaint room, small but clean, with an iron frame bed made tightly, the kind of way only hotels do. I tossed my bag on the chair and went straight for the shower. That's when I noticed it. The air in the room was cold. Not air-conditioned cold, more like window left open on a November night cold. But the windows were sealed. I told myself the old building probably had bad insulation and turned on the hot water, trying to forget the feeling of stillness that pressed against the back of my neck. That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't the bed. It was comfortable. It wasn't noise. There wasn't any. It was just something. A heaviness, like the room was holding its breath. Around 2:30 a.m., I rolled over and saw the imprint of a person on the other side of the bed. Not a depression in the mattress, but the subtle pull of fabric where someone might have lain. I reached out and touched the sheet. It was warm. I told myself I must have rolled over it, made the shape myself, or maybe the heater had kicked in unevenly. Anything was better than the thought that I was no longer alone. By morning, I was exhausted. I went downstairs and asked the clerk for a different room. She paused, typed something, then looked up with an apologetic smile. "We're full tonight, unfortunately," she said, and I could tell she meant it. I didn't press. Maybe I should have left then. Maybe I should have packed up and driven 3 more hours home. But I was stubborn and tired, and something about the whole thing felt irrational. That's how people end up in bad situations, I think. Not because they ignore the signs, but because they don't want to admit they're afraid. So, I stayed. I got coffee at the shop across the street and tried to pretend the night hadn't happened. But when I came back to the room around noon, the bed was made again, tighter than I had left it. The pillows fluffed, the sheets tucked like a nurse had done them. I hadn't requested cleaning. My do not disturb sign was still on the door. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe housekeeping just did a sweep of all rooms. But when I asked at the desk, the woman frowned. We don't enter rooms with that sign displayed. Ever. She looked at her chart, and no one was assigned to the 3rd floor today. That's when I felt it again, that slight sinking in the chest, like you've just remembered something you were trying not to. That night, I fell asleep with the light on. Sometime past 3, I woke up to the unmistakable sound of the shower turning on. The pipes groaned like they were being forced. I sat up, my heart drumming against my ribs, and stared at the bathroom door. It was open, the light flickering faintly, and steam was beginning to roll out. I didn't move. I couldn't. I stayed frozen in bed, watching the mist seep across the floor. And then, humming. That same lullaby from the hallway. Soft, delicate, almost tender. I wanted to call the front desk, but my phone was on the dresser, past the bathroom door. Instead, I closed my eyes and waited. Eventually, the sound faded. When I opened my eyes again, the steam was gone. But the bed beside me had a dent again, and this time the sheet was folded back, as if inviting me in. I left before sunrise, threw everything into my bag, didn't even brush my teeth. When I turned in my key, the early morning clerk didn't seem surprised. "Room 304?" she asked. I nodded. She didn't say anything else, just took the key and offered me a receipt I didn't want. As I walked to my car, I passed a woman unloading fresh linens from a cart. She looked older, maybe in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a hard mouth. "You stayed in 304? She asked without looking at me. I paused. "Yeah." She nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something for her. "That room hasn't been reassigned since Marla died," she said. "She was housekeeping. Came in every morning at 6. Made the beds just like that." I waited for her to explain further, but she didn't. Just wheeled her cart down the sidewalk and disappeared into the back entrance of the building. I don't know if I believe in ghosts. I've never seen anything. Not really. But I believe in places that remember. Places where the ordinary routines of someone's life, making beds, humming to themselves, showing up on time, get stuck like fingerprints in the air. I think room 304 remembers Marla, or maybe she remembers it. Either way, something in there hasn't moved on. If you're ever in a hotel and the bed is made tighter than it should be, or the air feels just a bit too still, don't second guess yourself. Fear is a kind of wisdom, the kind we only value after it's too late. Trust your body. Trust that creeping feeling. And if your instincts say leave, don't hesitate. You don't owe the unknown your politeness. You owe yourself your safety. And if stories like this make you think twice about checking into that old hotel on the side of the highway, then maybe you're exactly the kind of person who should stay with us. There are more stories ahead, more places like room 304. There are places that hum with old echoes. And then there are places that pulse with something more alive. Deep in the Smoky Mountains, a flicker of light lured 2 campers off the map and into a space that didn't belong to them. Not everything that glows in the dark is trying to lead you home. What follows is a story of curiosity, consequence, and vanishing. Listen closely. Story 3. We saw light, then nothing. We arrived at the campsite later than planned. The kind of late where the trees already look like silhouettes, and the sun has slipped behind the ridge. It was a Friday in late October. The Smokies already touched with frost, and the woods felt quieter than usual, like they were listening. Caleb had promised us it would be worth it. The spot was remote, untouched, far from tourists and screaming kids and RV engines. He called it the Reg of Silence. I didn't love that name, but I went along anyway. We were 3, Caleb, his younger sister Marin, and me. We'd all grown up hiking these hills, but this time was different. This time, we weren't on marked ground. The trail had started normally enough. Worn dirt, occasional signage, the scent of wet pine and fallen leaves. But about 4 miles in, Caleb veered off. He insisted it wasn't on any official map, that he'd found it last year while camping solo. A hidden shelf, he called it. Flat land on a slight cliff with a panoramic view of the valley below. Marin and I exchanged glances, but she shrugged and kept moving, her headlamp bouncing off tree bark. It was already dim when we set up camp. The fire struggled against the wind, and the cold settled in early. We didn't talk much. Caleb stared into the flame, quiet, like something was weighing on him. Marin hummed a song I half recognized but couldn't place. I remember thinking that the air smelled different there. Colder, thinner, like altitude or absence. We ate quietly, wrapped in fleece and flannel, watching the sky turn black. It was around 10 p.m. when we saw the light. At first, I thought it was a flashlight, a single white beam weaving through the trees below, maybe a hiker or a ranger. But it didn't move like a flashlight. It didn't bounce or flicker. It glided, smooth, deliberate, as if following a line only it could see. Caleb stood up first. "It's here again," he whispered. That's when I realized this wasn't the first time. I asked what he meant, but he ignored me, walking toward the edge of the ridge. The light paused for a second. Then, as if noticing him, it began to rise. Slowly, steadily, it lifted through the trees until it hovered just above the canopy. We stood frozen. Marin gripped my sleeve. The light wasn't blinding, but it was piercing. Too white, too quiet, like it absorbed sound instead of emitting it. Then it split. One beam became 2, then 3. They hovered, then began to drift toward us. Caleb whispered, "They don't like hesitation," and stepped forward. He took one slow step, then another. I tried to grab him, but he brushed me off. Marin whispered his name, voice cracking. Caleb raised his arms as if surrendering or greeting something sacred. That's when everything turned. The lights blinked, once, twice, then a blinding flash, and silence. I couldn't hear the wind. I couldn't hear the fire. I couldn't hear my own breath. The lights vanished, and so did Caleb. We screamed. We ran. We tore through brush and branches, shouting his name into nothing. There was no echo, just the sound of our boots on frozen leaves and the breathless panic in our chests. Marin fell. I picked her up. We circled back to camp, hoping he'd somehow returned. But the fire had gone out, and our gear was scattered. His pack was still there. His flashlight, his knife, everything except him. That night, we didn't sleep. We huddled beneath a tarp, shivering, listening for anything. But the woods gave us nothing. At dawn, we climbed down the ridge and made for the main trail. It took us most of the day to find it. By the time we reached a ranger station, we were dehydrated and half delirious. They sent a search team immediately. Drones, dogs, volunteers. They searched for 5 days. Nothing. No trace, no footprints, no signs of struggle. It was as if Caleb had evaporated. Marin stopped talking for a while after that. She wouldn't leave her apartment. When I visited, she would just stare out the window at the trees behind her building. She said she kept seeing flashes of light through the branches. 2 months later, I returned to the ridge alone. I shouldn't have, but something inside me felt unfinished. I wanted to understand what happened, to make sense of what we saw. I retraced every step, found the flattened patch where we camped, saw the burnt edge of the fire pit. Everything felt paused, like the woods were waiting. That night, I saw it again. A single light, gliding between the trees. But this time, I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just watched. And as it hovered at a distance, I realized something I hadn't before. It wasn't looking for him. It was waiting for someone else to follow. That's when I left. Some things out there don't want to be found. They don't haunt or chase or scream. They invite, they beckon, and they wait for the curious, the bold, or the heartbroken. But once you step toward them, you're no longer on your own path. You're on theirs. If you ever find yourself deep in the woods, far from any signal or signage, and you see a light that doesn't flicker, doesn't waver, don't follow it. Don't assume it's a ranger or another camper. Some lights don't lead you home. Some lights lead you away from everything you are. And you might think you're brave, that you're ready to know what lies beyond, but not all truths want to be seen. Some only want to be obeyed. Caleb wasn't reckless. He wasn't stupid. He just didn't want to wait for answers anymore. And I think, whatever those lights were, they sensed that. Maybe they only take the ones who say yes with their silence. If this story feels too familiar, if you've ever seen something in the woods you can't explain, or felt watched by something too quiet to be human, you're not alone. We share these stories not to scare, but to remember, so we don't make the same mistake twice. If you're still here, still listening, you belong with us. Stay close. Don't stray from the trail. And remember, the light is not always your friend. Some decisions are made in seconds. A missed train, a stranger's voice, a shortcut through a hallway that shouldn't exist anymore. Beneath Grand Central Terminal lies a door few notice and fewer return from. Our next story is not about getting lost. It's about being led somewhere you were never supposed to go. Story 4. He said, there was another entrance. I missed the last train by 4 minutes. It was a Thursday night in December, the kind where the wind slices through your coat no matter how many layers you wear. Grand Central was thinning out, commuters long gone, the holiday lights still blinking above cold marble floors. I'd been visiting a friend in the city and lost track of time, something I rarely did. Trains to Poughkeepsie stopped early on weekdays, and the next one wasn't until dawn. I remember standing there under the grand chandelier, calculating whether to sleep in the waiting room or brave the streets until sunrise. That's when he approached me. He looked ordinary. Black coat, gray scarf, no eye contact until he was already next to me. You missed the 12:12? He asked. I nodded, unsure how he knew. There's another entrance, he said, quietly, like a secret. Old platform. They don't list it on the board anymore, but the train stops there if you know where to wait. I asked him what he meant, and he smiled, just enough to make me curious. Follow me. It's faster than sleeping on a bench. Something about his voice was gentle, practiced. I hesitated. Of course I did, but my phone was dead. The terminal was emptying out, and he seemed calm, in control. So I followed. We walked past shuttered kiosks, past the locked-up magazine stand, toward a corridor I'd never noticed before. The lights grew dimmer with each step, buzzing overhead like tired flies. He didn't say much, just moved with certainty, like someone walking a path he'd memorized long ago. The corridor narrowed, sloped slightly downward, then opened into a section of the terminal that didn't feel like part of the building. The air changed, thicker like dust in old stone. I glanced behind me. The way back was already swallowed by shadow. We reached a stairwell with rusted railings, descending deeper into silence. At the bottom was a long hallway lined with cracked tiles and bolted doors. There were no signs, no trash cans, no security cameras. Just that flickering orange light you only see in basements and horror movies. The man stopped in front of a door labeled Track 61. I'd heard of it before, some urban legend about Roosevelt's private train car. "We wait here," he said, almost reverent. "It comes once an hour, but not always." I looked around. No benches, no schedule. Just peeling paint and the sound of water dripping somewhere beyond the tracks. I asked him how he knew about this place. He said he used to work for the terminal years ago when this platform was still active. They closed it off after the accident, he added, then said nothing more. I didn't ask. Something in his tone warned me not to. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time felt strange down there, the kind of stretched, echoing time you feel in dreams. I checked my watch, but it had stopped. The second hand stuck at 12:13. That's when I noticed the people. Across the tracks, partially hidden by shadow, stood a small group. They hadn't been there a moment ago. 5 or 6 figures, motionless. No luggage, no conversation. Just standing, watching. I blinked hard, but they didn't move. The man beside me didn't seem to notice. I whispered, asking if anyone else came this way. Only some, he said. Most don't listen. Most prefer the known path. I couldn't tell if he meant that as a warning or a challenge. A faint rumble broke the stillness, distant but growing. I looked down the tracks and saw headlights bending the tunnel. Dim, slow moving, approaching like a ghost, unsure of its destination. The man stepped closer to the edge. You'll feel a pull, he said, but don't step forward unless you're certain. That's when I realized I wasn't certain about any of this. Not the man, not the platform, not the thing pretending to be a train. Its engine made no sound. Its windows were blacked out. It stopped without screeching. Doors opened, but no one inside was visible. The group across the tracks turned as one and began walking into the dark, disappearing behind the metal. The man looked at me, expectant. You coming? He asked, voice hollow now, like an echo bounced off a memory. My body screamed no, but something in the air pulled at me. A heaviness behind the ribs, a whisper behind my ear. I took one step, then another toward the door, but I stopped short. Inside, I saw something, or thought I did. Not people, shapes, shifting, waiting. I stepped back. The man frowned, not angry, just disappointed. Not your time then, he said, and the doors closed. The train pulled away without a sound. The hallway was empty again. No people. No signs of life, just the dripping, the tiles, and my breath. I turned to ask the man what had just happened, but he was gone. No footsteps, no rustle, nothing. I ran. I don't remember how I found the stairs or how I made it back to the lit parts of the terminal, but by the time I reached the main concourse, my legs were shaking. I sat on a bench and waited for the morning train. I didn't sleep. Later, I asked one of the employees about Track 61. He smiled politely and said it hadn't been operational in decades, and no one was allowed down there. I must have taken a wrong turn. That's the explanation they always give. A wrong turn, a forgotten hallway, a coincidence. But I know what I saw, and I know the decision I made to stay on this side. I think about that moment often. About the others who might have stepped forward, what they saw, what they became. We make choices every day, often without thinking. A left instead of a right, a yes instead of a no. But some paths don't take you where you expect. Some paths take something from you, and some doors, once opened, never close all the way again. If you ever find yourself in a place that feels off, too quiet, too empty, like time has slipped around it, don't assume it's harmless. Not all doors are meant to be opened, and not every train is meant to take you home. If stories like this echo something you felt but never said aloud, maybe you're not alone. Maybe you've walked close to the edge once too. Stay with us. The veil is thin in places like this, and sometimes the only thing keeping you here is choosing not to leave. Even when we escape the moment doesn't always release us. Some choices follow us home. Others linger in old pages and attics long untouched. In the next story, a hidden journal opens a door into a forgotten life, and a warning that some secrets were buried for good reason. This is the story of Elena, and why she never truly left. Story 5. Elena never left. It began with a locked drawer in the attic of a house no one remembered building. The farmhouse stood quiet and low on the edge of Lancaster County, too far from any road to be noticed, too intact to have been truly abandoned. I found it by accident, wandering off trail with my camera, chasing the golden light that dipped through October trees. There was no driveway, no mailbox, no visible sign that anyone had lived there in the last 40 years, but it didn't feel empty. It felt paused, like someone had simply stepped out and might return at any moment. I should have turned back. I should have respected that stillness. But curiosity is a hungry thing. The door was unlocked, swollen with weather and stubborn, but it gave with a sigh when pushed. The air inside was dense, like an attic in midsummer, sweet with dust, laced with something faintly sour, like decaying apples. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, and the furniture wore sheets like ghosts hiding in plain sight. In the front room, a rotary phone still hung on the wall. Upstairs, the floor creaked as if warning each footstep. I found the attic behind a narrow door at the end of the hall. The stairs were steep, the kind that force you to stoop. At the top, the space opened into a room soaked in amber light, filtered through a single round window. A trunk sat beneath it, carved with initials, ERW. Beside it stood a small writing desk, and inside its center drawer was the journal. It was bound in red leather, edges curled with age. The pages were yellowed, but the handwriting was precise, elegant, the ink still dark. The first entry was dated October 12th, 1974. Today I met him by the creek. He says my name like it's a promise. I flipped through the pages, skimming lines that spoke of wildflowers and secret glances and parents who didn't approve. It was the kind of diary teenagers write, the kind that imagines love as a world that belongs only to them. But something shifted midway. The tone darkened. The sentences grew shorter, more frantic. He doesn't like when I write. Says it keeps me from him. I heard something under the floor last night. Mama says I sleepwalk now, but I don't remember dreaming. I stopped reading. My hands felt cold. I should have left then. Should have placed the book back in its drawer, shut it tight, and gone. But I kept it. Took it with me. I told myself it was for documentation, that I'd find a way to return it later. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the attic window. I heard the creak of those narrow stairs. The journal sat on my desk, unopened, but I could feel it, like it was watching. Around 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed once, an old landline ring. I don't have that ringtone. I never said it. I turned the phone over. No call, no message, just silence, and that impossible sound still echoing in my ears. Over the next few days, more entries appeared in the journal. That's what I told myself. Maybe I missed them before. Maybe the pages had stuck together. But the ink was fresh. The handwriting trembled. He's back. I told him no, but he doesn't hear me. I buried it in the floor. He can't read what I wrote if he doesn't know where to look. I stopped taking the journal out. I wrapped it in cloth and shoved it in a drawer. But still, at night, I'd wake to the sound of soft footsteps on wooden stairs. Always 13 steps. always stopping just outside my door. I finally returned to the farmhouse the next week. This time, I wasn't alone. Nina, a friend from campus who studied folklore, insisted on coming with me. She believed in residual hauntings, in echoes of trauma tied to place. She brought a digital recorder, salt, and a tiny silver bell she claimed could ward off things that didn't belong. I brought the journal. When we reached the house, the air around it felt wrong. Thicker, like water before a storm. The door groaned open just as it had before. Inside, everything was exactly the same, except for the attic. The light was dimmer, the dust unsettled. We opened the floorboards beneath the trunk. It took 3 attempts. My hand shook so badly I dropped the crowbar twice. Finally, a loose plank gave way. Beneath it was a bundle of cloth, wrapped tightly and stained with something dark. Inside was a second journal, smaller, torn. The last page read, "If you find this, please tell Mama I'm sorry." I tried to leave, but he said he'd follow. He says this house belongs to us now. Nina whispered that we should burn it. I said no. I don't know why. Some part of me felt like that would make it worse, like it would break something open that couldn't be closed again. We left the journals in the attic and backed away without speaking. But as we reached the front door, we heard the stairs creak above us. 13 steps. Soft. Precise. We ran. Neither of us looked back. I haven't returned to the farmhouse since. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear that ring again. That hollow landline chime. Once, I found the red journal on my bed. I hadn't touched it in weeks. I burned it then. Watched the ink curl and vanish. But I'm not sure it mattered. Some places do not forget. Some stories are too heavy to die. Elena never left that house. Not really. She was swallowed by it, folded into its walls, her words etched into its beams like blood into bark. And the man she wrote about, whoever he was, whatever he became, still walks those halls, still opens that drawer, still waits for someone to read what was never meant to be read. If you find something old, something personal, something hidden, ask yourself why it was buried. Ask yourself who wanted it forgotten. Not every voice from the past needs to be heard again. Some were silenced for good reason, and when a house feels like it's watching you, it probably is. If this story settled somewhere in your chest, if it made you remember a hallway you swore you'd forgotten, or a sound that never had a source, you're not alone. Stay close, listen deeply, but never open drawers that don't belong to you. Some pages turn themselves. Grief leaves a hole, but guilt leaves a weight. Sometimes it drags us toward the very place we should be fleeing. In our next story, a simple dare becomes something darker on the waters of Lake Lanier, where the line between prank and ritual blurs, and the lake remembers what it was promised. Story 6. You dare, you float. The lake was colder than it should have been for July. Even after sunset, the air was thick and humid, the kind that clings to your skin. But the water itself felt wrong. Too still, too dark, too cold beneath the surface. We'd driven out to Lake Lanier to celebrate Marcus's birthday. Just 5 of us, packed into 2 trucks, with coolers of cheap beer and folding chairs. None of us had planned to swim that night. That came later, after the dare, after the story, after someone mentioned the floating house. It wasn't a real house, not anymore. Just a half-rotted structure drifting a few hundred feet from the western shore. 4 walls, no roof, tethered to nothing, slowly spinning with the wind like it was thinking. I'd seen it before from a distance and assumed it was a raft or someone's failed dock project. But Marcus said it used to be part of a marina before the flooding, before they turned the valley into a reservoir, before the water rose over the old town beneath. We sat in a loose circle near the fire, cicadas buzzing like static in the woods behind us. The lake stretched out flat and black under the sky, reflecting nothing. That's when Caleb brought up the story, half whisper, half challenge. They say if you step onto the floating house after midnight, you'll hear it creak like it remembers who used to live there. He paused, looked at each of us, and if you stay long enough, the lake remembers you too. We laughed, nervously. The kind of laugh you do when you don't believe something, but you still feel it crawl under your skin. Then he said it. You dare, you float. It was stupid. A phrase someone made up. But the way he said it, like it was a rule older than the lake itself, made the air shift. Marcus stood first, always the bold one, always with something to prove. He stripped to his boxers, grabbed the flashlight from his bag, and said, "I'll do it." We cheered like kids around a bonfire. He waded in, cursing at the cold, then began to swim. The beam of his flashlight jittered with every stroke, and the floating house, barely visible now, waded ahead like a trap someone forgot to dismantle. We watched in silence as he climbed aboard. The beam disappeared, then flickered back as it panned across the inside walls. Marcus yelled something we couldn't hear. Then the light went out. Just like that. One blink. Gone. At first, we thought it was a joke. Caleb called his name, laughing. No answer. I stood, trying to focus my eyes across the distance. Nothing moved. The house had stopped spinning. It just floated, still and square and silent. Then we heard it. One loud creak, like wood twisting under weight. Then another. Then nothing. The lake was silent again. We waited. 10 minutes. 15. The fire crackled behind us, indifferent. Caleb cursed, stripped his shirt off, and said he was going in. But before he reached the water, something surfaced. At first it looked like driftwood, then like clothing. Then it was Marcus, floating face up, eyes wide open. We ran, all of us. We pulled him onto the shore, shaking, shouting, but he didn't move. His skin was ice cold. No breath, no pulse. I'll never forget the sound Caleb made then. Not a scream, not a cry, but something from the gut, raw and guttural. We called 911. The medics came fast, but it was too late. The coroner said it was a seizure. Sudden, unpredictable, happened in the water. No one mentioned the house. No one mentioned the dare, but we knew. We all knew. I didn't go to the funeral. Couldn't. Instead, I went back to the lake 2 weeks later, alone. It was a mistake. I told myself it was for closure, to leave flowers, to understand. But when I arrived, the house wasn't where it had been. It had drifted, closer, almost touching the dock now, like it had been waiting. I stepped onto the wood, one step, then another. It creaked beneath me, exactly like Caleb said. The inside was empty. No markings, no signs of life. Just water stains on the walls and the smell of mildew and something older. I stood there until sunset, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. But when I turned to leave, I found a shoe. Just one, old, faded, floating in the corner, and inside it, tucked in the heel, was a strip of torn fabric, Marcus's shirt. I never told anyone. I didn't need to. We all stopped going to the lake after that. We stopped saying his name out loud. Caleb transferred schools. Jenna moved to Oregon. I stayed. But I don't sleep near windows anymore. Not when it rains. Not when the air smells like wet earth and old wood. Because sometimes when it's quiet enough, I hear that creak again. Not in my house, not in my head, but somewhere close. There are places in this world where memory lingers, where water doesn't just reflect, it absorbs, it remembers. And sometimes it wants you to remember too. Not everything sinks, not everything lets go. If you ever find yourself near Lake Lanier and someone points to the water and dares you to go out there, to touch what floats, to prove you're not afraid, say no. Not because you're scared, but because you respect what came before you. Because some dares aren't about bravery, they're invitations. And this lake, it doesn't give second chances. It only takes what you offer. Not all hauntings are loud. Some simply wait for you to come back. When a guest checked into a hotel room long forgotten, he discovered that not every call is a wrong number, and not every vacancy is truly empty. What happened next was quiet, but not silent. Personal, but not private. Welcome to Room 206. Story 7. Room 206 missed you. The Stanley Hotel wasn't my first choice. I'd driven into Estes Park after a speaking engagement in Boulder, hoping to find a quiet motel to rest for the night before heading home. Everything else was booked, packed with tourists chasing late autumn foliage. The Stanley was the only place with a vacancy. I remember the woman at the front desk glancing up after typing my name and saying, almost too quickly, "Room 206 is available." She handed me the key card without waiting for me to confirm. I didn't question it. I was tired, the kind of tired that makes you think less clearly, that lets you shrug off odd tones and gut tugs. I just nodded, took the elevator, and stepped into a hallway that smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish. Familiar, but not warm. Room 206 looked ordinary at first. Queen bed, antique desk, mirror above a low dresser, a window overlooking the mountains. The bathroom light flickered when I turned it on, the kind of nervous flicker that felt more like hesitation than malfunction. I tossed my bag onto the chair and noticed the voicemail light blinking on the room phone. One missed message. That struck me as odd. I had just checked in. Curious, I pressed the button. A voice, female, young, whispered, "He's here," followed by a long, staticky silence before the line cut off. My skin tightened across my back, but I told myself it was a mistake, a glitch. Maybe housekeeping had pressed the wrong extension. Still, something about the voice lingered. Not the words themselves, but the tone. It hadn't sounded afraid, it had sounded resigned. I didn't sleep much that night. The room felt wrong, like it was waiting for something. The air seemed heavier near the dresser, as though it resisted movement. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft, measured, like someone walking barefoot on carpet. They stopped in front of my door. I held my breath. No knock, no key turning, just silence. Then, faintly, a second voicemail alert began to blink. I didn't check it until morning. The message was different this time. The same voice, a little closer now. "Don't let him in," she said. Then a low hum filled the background, like old elevator motors, distant and deep. The message ended abruptly. I packed quickly, heart pounding, telling myself it was all explainable. Hacked lines, prank calls, paranoia. But I knew better. I could feel it in the way the mirror on the dresser seemed slightly off-center even though it hadn't moved. In the way my reflection sometimes blinked half a second too late. At checkout, I mentioned the voicemails. The front desk clerk, a young man this time, paled slightly. 206? He asked. I nodded. He tapped at his keyboard, then looked up slowly. That room hasn't had a working phone line since 2013, he said, voice low. We've had reports before. People hearing things, seeing things. He hesitated. We usually keep it blocked off, but... He didn't finish. I didn't press him. I left. I didn't plan to return. But a month later, I got a call on my personal phone. No number. Just the same voice. You forgot something. That was it. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, a package arrived at my office. No return address. Inside was a key card. Room 206, Stanley Hotel. I never told anyone. I buried it in my desk drawer beneath stacks of papers I never planned to read. For weeks, nothing happened. Then the dreams began. Always the same. I'm back in the room. The mirror is missing. The window is open, though the wind doesn't move the curtains. There's a figure in the corner, tall, not quite human, humming something slow and tuneless. The phone rings once. I never pick it up. I always wake up before the second ring. Eventually I returned. I needed to know. Needed to see if the room was still there. If I had imagined it all. The clerk at the desk didn't ask questions when I gave him the key card. Just nodded, almost sadly, and handed me the updated check-in form. Room 206 looked unchanged, but colder, quieter. The voicemail light blinked before I even shut the door. This time, I didn't play it. I unplugged the phone. I sat on the bed and waited. Around 3 a.m., the mirror shifted. Not physically, but in perspective. My reflection smiled before I did. And behind me, I saw the figure again. Not in the room. In the glass. Closer than it had ever been. I left at dawn. I haven't gone back since. But I still get calls. Always at 2:06 a.m. Always from an unlisted number. I don't answer them anymore, but I listen. And I wonder if the girl who left those voicemails is still there, caught in the space between walls and wires, repeating warnings that never reach the right ears. Some places remember us. Some rooms don't want to be empty. They call out in the only ways they can, through static, through dreams, through the chill that moves up your spine when you think you're alone. The Stanley Hotel isn't haunted in the Hollywood sense. There are no slamming doors or flying furniture. It's quieter than that. Smarter. It waits. And when it misses someone, it knows how to find them. If you ever find yourself staying somewhere that feels too still, where the phone rings without reason or the mirror blinks back too slowly, leave. Don't ask questions. Don't look for answers. Some stories don't want to be solved. They want to be remembered. Some stories begin with a missing person. Others begin with the spaces they leave behind. Our final story takes us beneath the surface of campus life, into a dorm room where something was waiting under the bed, breathing slow and patient. It was never about what could be found. It was about what should have stayed hidden. Story 8. They found a door under her bed. It was supposed to be a normal dorm assignment, the kind every freshman gets without ceremony or meaning. Hannah had been placed in Ryber Hall, 5th floor, room 512, a narrow, sunlit space overlooking a patch of lawn where students sprawled on blankets between lectures. It was nothing special. Beige walls, 2 twin beds, shared closet, too thin carpet. But from the first night, she couldn't sleep. She said the mattress felt uneven, not soft or hard. Just strange, like something was subtly off balance beneath it, as if she were resting on the lid of a box rather than a bed frame. At first, she blamed the university-issued furniture. Everyone did. But over the next few weeks, the unease settled into something colder, quieter. She stopped talking much in the group chat, stopped going out at night, and then one morning, she told Ravi, her roommate, that she'd been hearing things. Not voices, not footsteps. Something else. Like breathing, she said, but not mine. Ravi was used to late-night ramblings. He grew up with 3 older siblings and had a high tolerance for the weird. But something about Hannah's eyes that morning made him pause. She looked thinner. Not physically, but like her presence had shrunk. Like the corners of her spirit were folding inward. He offered to trade beds. She said no. That night, he heard it too. Just after 2 a.m., a faint, rhythmic sound. Inhale, pause, exhale, from under her bed. He sat up, heart hammering. Hannah didn't move. She was lying still, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling like she was waiting for something to finish. They reported it to housing, of course. Maintenance came, checked the vents, tapped the walls, said everything was fine. One of them joked, maybe it's the ghost of midterms past, then laughed too loud and left without looking back. Hannah didn't laugh. She asked Ravi if he believed in trapped spaces. He said no, but the question clung to him. That weekend, she didn't leave the room. Ravi brought food, tried to cheer her up, but she barely ate. Just kept staring at the floor beneath her bed like it was thinking. On Monday morning, she was gone. Her phone was still on the desk, her laptop still open. Her shoes sat by the door, but she was nowhere. Campus security checked the cameras. No footage of her leaving. Her ID hadn't scanned any exits. It was as if the room had swallowed her. Ravi was questioned, searched, cleared. Grief counselors were offered. Flyers were printed, but no trace of Hannah ever turned up. Eventually, her name faded from conversation. New students moved into the room. The door got a fresh coat of paint. The bed stayed where it was. 2 years later, I moved into room 512. I didn't know any of this at first. No one tells you which rooms held missing girls. No one tells you which corners of campus have stories that administration would rather forget. I found out about Hannah because one night, while shifting the furniture around to make room for a reading nook, I noticed the carpet beneath my bed was slightly raised, just a fraction of an inch, enough to catch the toe of my sock. I pulled it back. Underneath was a wooden panel, worn and nailed down unevenly. I texted my RA, but it was past midnight, so I waited, staring. At 2:06 a.m., I heard the breathing. It was unmistakable. Too slow to be my own, too deliberate to be pipes or old building sounds. I pressed my hand against the panel. It was warm. That terrified me more than if it had been cold. Something alive was always worse than something dead. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I went to the library, pulling old building blueprints from the archives. There it was, a maintenance tunnel, long sealed, running beneath Reber Hall. Marked for closure in the 1970s. No record of it ever being reopened. No reason for a panel like that to exist. I asked around. No one remembered Hannah by name, but when I described her, brown hair, quiet, eyes that always looked like they were halfway to disappearing, someone flinched. A girl in my psych class said she remembered hearing about a missing student once, but it had been debunked as a runaway case. She didn't sound like she believed it. That night, I stayed awake, watching the panel. At exactly 2:06, it shifted, just slightly, as if something beneath it had turned over. I stood frozen, unable to speak. Then, without warning, the corner of the panel lifted, half an inch, just enough for me to see an eye, human, wide, terrified. It vanished a second later. The panel dropped. Silence returned. I moved out the next morning. No one believed me, of course. My roommate joked I'd been watching too many horror films. The RA said it was stress. I didn't care. I switched dorms, left that bed, that room, that floor. But some nights I still wake at 2:06, heart pounding, staring at my ceiling like it's made of thin wood and breathing walls. I think about Hannah. I think about how quickly we forget the things that don't fit inside neat explanations. How the university never filled in the tunnel. How silence is often the loudest proof. Some doors don't look like doors. Some stories don't end when someone goes missing. They keep unfolding, underneath us, just out of reach, waiting for someone else to notice. Hannah may still be there, somewhere between wood and concrete, caught in a place no one believes exists anymore. A girl in a sealed tunnel, breathing the same way every night, hoping someone listens long enough to find her. If you ever feel your mattress shift slightly at night, if the air in your room grows still at the same time every evening, don't ignore it. Don't tell yourself it's nothing. Some spaces remember, some girls don't leave, and some stories knock quietly from beneath your bed, asking not to be forgotten. 8 stories. 8 moments where hesitation, impulse, or trust tipped the balance into something irreversible. And now that you've walked with us through every step, every silence, every shadow, there's only one place left to go. But be warned, some stories don't let go. Let's step together into what still lingers. You've heard their voices now. You've walked their paths. From red canyons to haunted hotel rooms, from forgotten dorms to the shadows beneath still water. Each story carried the weight of a moment that could have gone another way. And yet, it didn't. The choice was made, the line was crossed, and what came next was something no one saw coming. That's the thing about these stories. They don't end when the screaming stops. They linger, in the quiet, in the empty spaces between questions, in the way you check your reflection a second longer, or pause before opening that basement door, not because of what's there, but because of what might have been. If there's one thing these stories teach us, it's that we don't need to seek out horror. Sometimes it finds us in the middle of the ordinary, wrapped in routine, disguised as opportunity. It doesn't ask for permission, it just waits. In a voicemail, in a gust of wind, in the feeling that someone is watching when no one should be. And when it finds the smallest crack in our judgment, it enters. But fear, for all its weight, is also a warning. It speaks not in shouts, but in whispers, telling us to trust our unease, to say no, to leave when something doesn't feel right. That's not weakness, that's survival. If you've stayed with us through these stories, maybe you felt it too. Maybe you made a decision you still think about in the dark. You're not alone. Thank you for walking these paths with us, for listening, for remembering. If these stories left a mark on you, then you're exactly who they were meant for. Until next time, stay curious but not careless, and always be careful what you open, especially beyond the veil.